Joined by Robert Tsai. He's a constitutional law professor at American University's Washington College of Law. Professor, let me start with you, because I think the Attorney General in California is anxious to hear some different interpretations. Who has standing immediately to sue the president on this decision right now?
Well, Chuck, as you say, standing is going to be one of the major obstacles that the challengers are going to have to overcome. And what a person has to show in order to successfully get to the merits of the case will be an actual injury and some sort of causation, and also to show that this is the kind of thing that courts can do something about.
All right, so injured party number one would be Congress. So does Congress as a entity have the standing, or an individual member of Congress?
So the individual members of Congress will try to sue the president, and there is some case law, mostly of a lower court nature, that suggests that they could, but these cases are controversial, and it's not clear what the Supreme Court would say. I think the clearest standing would probably be the landowners, whose property would have to be taken before any part of the kind of major areas of this wall would have to be built.
So eminent domain being invoked without even an act of Congress.
Yeah, so that's one of the major problems, right? So there are a lot of things that will have to happen practically before ground is even broken on this wall, right? And so the lawsuits clearing is one of them, but then getting to that land, that's something that could take months, if not years.
There's an argument to be made, if you're the president, don't you want this decision immediately? Couldn't you ask, you know what, let's have immediate review by the Supreme Court? Right,
so I think there's going to be some sort of ability to get expedited review here, but as fast as the Supreme Court can act, we're still talking about many, many months, in even the fastest cases.
If he doesn't spend, so he's declared this national emergency, but if he specifically sticks to the money that Congress has appropriated, does I guess the lawsuits stay on hold until he touches the money?
I think that what the parties are going to seek is an injunction that prevents him from even moving the money on the basis of this emergency, because the main question here will be a statutory question about what the National Emergencies Act of 1976 permits the president to do in terms of moving money around. Now, he's declared this emergency in order to try to do it, but most people who've looked at the questions say that he really has to show that the wall is necessary to support the armed forces, and that if he can't make that showing, then his statutory argument really is going to look rather weak.
Did the political response that he gave today at the press conference, or some, I think the ACLU had it in their press release, his response that essentially to my colleague Peter Alexander, where he said that he essentially did it so he could just do it faster.
Yeah, so
does that, I mean, did he undermine his own argument?
Yeah, I think he did. I think you're going to see those quotes repeated in every brief that's filed against him, because they really do make him sound as though this is something that's sort of a leisurely thing, and that he's almost sort of making up the emergency, right? And it really sort of confirms the sense that if we look seriously at the problem at the border, that we would be hard pressed to find any kind of empirical evidence that suggested that there's anything getting worse. For example, these migrants are unarmed, right? And they're coming from poor countries, and this doesn't sound the kind of thing that requires the armed forces to be involved.
And the fact that the stats show that things are getting, that appear statistically it's getting better, not worse. So when he said, I could have kept fighting and getting more money from Congress, actually, statistically, that backs up he had time. Yeah. There is no urgency.
I think that's right. And so that's going to be the major argument here. But I would caution one thing, and that is that the law that we're talking about itself doesn't define what a national emergency actually is.
Right.
And the courts will be particularly reluctant to define that in any clear way.
Well, you heard Bill Kristol say, hey, if Congress, which has the ability to override a veto, has the ability to perhaps withdraw this emergency, if they essentially don't have the votes to do it, the Supreme Court might say, well, you have the power to do that. We're not going to help you use your power. Is that a possibility here, that way they stay out of this and hand it to the president?
I think it's more than a possibility. I think it would be a preference. If you're talking about Chief Justice Roberts, he is an institutionalist, and everybody says that he would prefer not to thrust the Supreme Court into major national battles, and this is one of them. Yeah. And so if there's a way for him to sort of delay and for Congress to actually do the rebuking, that would be preferred.
My final question for you is, frankly, very pertinent to my next guest. How does the state of California, who has, as a state attorney general, because there's a bunch that would like to file a lawsuit, the state attorney general in Washington state would like to, Xavier Becerra said he will. what would give them standing?
Well, I think that the best argument from the state's perspective is to rely on a case about standing involving the state of Massachusetts. And if the state of California can make an argument that its interests in the land down there are affected by what the president's done here in terms of reallocating resources, and that's going to be the best argument they can make.
Professor Tsai, thank you for giving us a little Constitutional Law 101.
My pleasure.
I guess in this case, 202.
Thanks for having me.
Very much. Thank you very much. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.